This is the second webinar in what we call the Nordic Webinar Series, Policy and Practice in the Development of Open Science. Last week we saw the first webinar where representatives from the open science field in Norway presented their work, and today we shall hear 4 speakers from Denmark. We are still waiting for one of our speakers. I was told she's stuck in the tube somewhere in Copenhagen, but we will hope that she will arrive in due time. But I think there's a plan for how to proceed with the webinar anyway. And with that, I hand over to our speakers to present themselves in the order that they find most suitable. Please go ahead.
I can start. My name is Sofie Fink. I'm the head of data management in DeiC, and actually we have just changed the order of the presentations. So I'll go first. I'll talk in a little while, and I think then maybe Mette, will you present yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I work for DeiC as a Danish representative in the Knowledge Exchange, which is a kind of an open science partnership we have with other national infrastructure providers in Europe.
Thank you. And Susanne?
Yeah, my name is Susanne Boer, and I'm a senior advisor in research data management at the University of Copenhagen. My background is in research. I was a postdoc for a number of years, but now help researchers, and I work with data management policy. So I will tell you a little bit as a case, kind of, what we are doing at the University of Copenhagen today.
Thank you, Susanne. And then we are waiting, all from the group, Mareike, who will join us hopefully very soon. Mareike is placed at the Copenhagen Business School and will talk about the national landscape for open science. I think that's it. And then we acknowledge Hannah Mihai, who have supported us all from DeiC, who has supported us all in planning this webinar. Unfortunately, she's not in charge of the Copenhagen tube. Yeah, the program for today, I'll talk a bit of the national data management services we have on the way, and which we will call services that will support open science. Then we have Mette to talk about knowledge exchange and open science under, I guess, maybe a better title than I put here. Then Mareike has talked national landscape for open science, and then lastly, Susanne. Yes, in DeiC, we're planning to launch some new services for open science, and we have one service running already. So you can say we are talking about open science from a sort of research infrastructure perspective, and especially for data on the issue of data management services. Because you can say, as Karen were good to introduce DeiC in the beginning, DeiC is actually our the responsibility for sort of implementing open science in the data landscape. It's actually put on the universities, but of course we would very much see it in our mandate to support the things going on at the universities. So I think that's much for that. And then the actual data management services, we have, we're talking about DeiC Dataverse, with the kind of the Dataverse that you probably all of you know of, this kind of software installation. We have DeiC storage, we have DeiC sensitive storage, and we have a DeiC data management plan. This is the sort of the services we have for supporting data management, and in that case for open science. And to be frank here, we can say that 3 of the 4 services are to come. Actually, at the moment, we're only the service we're only running is the one on the DeiC TMP. So that's sort of that's the truth on these matters at the moment. That even though I've decided to talk about the DeiC Dataverse, as it will be launched end of the year, beginning of next. So it's almost here, let's say. So a little bit more information on the DeiC Dataverse. The DeiC Dataverse is to be implemented by Copenhagen University together with DeiC. It's a platform to support all researchers at the Danish university, so they can publish and archive their research data. The focus, I can say, for now is very much on the data and metadata bit. Software and all other sort of digital research objects are a little bit still in to come. The important thing to stress about DeiC Dataverse is that it supports to a large extent the FAIR principles. By DeiC Dataverse, researchers will can get a persistent identifier for their data set, DOI, to make data findable. They can provide structured metadata, so in order to support searchability and browsability for their data. Also, DeiC Dataverse will sort of make sure that data via APIs are accessible in different kinds of ways, and the DeiC Dataverse will also make sure that there is a proper license, so data can be made reusable in a proper way. Each university in Denmark will have local support for the DeiC Dataverse in order to support their local users at the universities. Let me show you how it works. And this is the way in order sort of to draw this ahead with a DeiC Dataverse, and then there will be an installation of a Dataverse at each of the 8 Danish universities. And you can see them here on the slide. So that's the kind of the layout of the service when it will be launched. Then we have together with the project with Copenhagen University, we have formulated actually how is the argument for that we need this DeiC Dataverse as a trusted data repository. And first of all, more and more the value of research data is acknowledged, and we need tools to support and retain this knowledge. Publication of research data is more and more again acknowledged, and we need something to increase this visibility and impact of research. And then adding to this requirements, we see more and more requirements from publishers and funders to make research data available. And also the code of conduct for research integrity require for researchers that their data are stored for a certain period of time, and this way they need somewhere to deposit data. And in at least the fifth argument we have put is that more and more the research institutions, universities, will have policies for research data management, and in there they need a place to go to actually sort of implement this policy. And all in all, we see this DeiC Dataverse as a trusted digital data repository, and that can sort of support all these demands and needs and you can say tendencies around us. We can support that by the DeiC Dataverse. Then a little bit about the DeiC storage and DeiC sensitive storage, and that's these services are supposed to be launched next year, maybe more summer than spring. But again, they are to be viewed as around the corner. And this, let me add that it's a service that will be implemented by Aarhus universities and University of Copenhagen together with DeiC. Oh, something wrong with the slides. Oh, I'm sorry. I had this a bit more argumentation. I don't know how that happened. A bit more argumentation on why we need a trusted digital, a trusted national repository. But again, I think maybe let me not go too much into that. I think we should share the slide in the right order. Sorry, I'll send them to you in the right order, and you can see these argument, and they're very much taken from, you can say, from the same grounds as the argument for needing a trusted data repository. So let me not dig too much into that. I'm looking at the time. So then we will proceed to the DeiC storage and DeiC sensitive storage. This will be national storage system open to all as the DeiC database. And the idea is that we have two solutions. One solution, which you can say is a secure solution, but not approved for highly sensitive data. That's why we'll have the DeiC sensitive storage that is sort of approved for particularly personal data. So in that case, we're talking about two services for storage, but we tend to talk about them as one. And going into a little bit more details on the DeiC storage service. Storage capacity kind of a system where the research officers can store, share, exchange, and reference data. Up to 10 years for now. It's a little bit under discussion, but it's not it's not storage for forever. And at the moment, we're talking about 10 years. And important is that the solution will function together in conjunction with institutional solution and domain-specific solutions, and indeed international infrastructures as well. Yeah, and also it will support that you can exchange data, for instance, with HPC resources as well as other storage facilities. So it's not in any way to tend to be a sort of a service that functions in itself. And also in order to allow researchers, as we know, that they collaborate with others. And of course, there will be a link between these two kind of services: the trusted data repository and storage facilities. And in that way, you can have you will have your data file in the storage, and you can have a freeze file, and then you can reference it from the DeiC dataverse. What should I mention? Yeah, and actually, when seen in the workflow, the DOI, the persistent identifier, will be amended by the DeiC dataverse, and it will then connect back to the freezed file in the DeiC storage. I think that's all I can say about that. Yeah, and then I also would mention to you that we actually have one running service on the DeiC DMP. And I expect most of you acknowledge or are aware of the DMP service from the Digital Curation Center, and this is the kind of service we are running for all Danish universities with local support at each university. Then, in order sort of to put these different data management services we're coming up with, or the one we have, sort of in the line of open science and the FAIR principles, where DeiC sort of sees our raison d'être. It's yeah, we see a sort of data management at the bottom, at the sort of platform. Then we have the FAIR principles, and that sort of are connected to the data management, and that's what we aim at, or we're struggling to get. And you can say that we sort of package content, and then we have the services on the way to open science, and we have the services like Dataverse as a trusted data repository, and we have the two storage services sort of to support sort of the way for the researchers to that we can I don't know if you say reach open science, but we get in this direction. Yes, and that was what I had, and I have some questions here. So if there's any questions.
Well, we have. Thank you very much, Anne-Sophie, for a great presentation. We do have a question in the chat. The question is, will the storage be free of charge to users, and is there a max storage per file size space?
Very good question, which we are discussing at the moment. The plan is we will have sort of a standard capacity of storage available for each researcher at a Danish university. And then we will have an amount of sort of the ready-made storage that the what we call the front offices, sort of our support at the local support, you can say, at the universities. They will have an amount of storage that they can allocate right away. So as a researcher, you can come and see, sort of come and say that I need some more than my standard capacity. If you sort of go further up and have sort of more need for storage, there will be we'll set up a sort of a grant system where you can apply for storage, and then sort of as a fourth way will be that you actually buy storage capacity and add to the existing service. So that's the way we plan to move forward on allocation of storage capacity.
Thank you very much. But yes, the fourth option was to buy storage, but the first three options, are they free of charge?
The third. No, I hope I don't get it. It sounds very difficult. The third, you would be apply actually for funding in order to have that. So it will be without charge for the researchers, you can say, but you will have to make an application, and of course be in you can say in competition with the others' needs.
We have another short question from the chat, and then we can proceed to the next speaker. But the last question from the chat is there a procedure to delete frozen files?
Very good question. And we're actually talking very much about these matters. We have in Denmark this what we call the FAIR strategy, or the national strategy for data management based on the FAIR principle. And there we talk or have a working group on data value, and obviously that connects with if it's reasonable to actually delete files. So I hope in that group we'll go further into these discussions. At the moment, I think we haven't a clear plan for that. But it's a very good and important question. So thank you for both of the questions.
I'm sure we'll come back to that topic later on.
Let's do that.
Please, Anne-Sophie, pass the word on to the next speaker.
Yes, I will pass the word on to Mette, who will talk for knowledge exchange on open science.
Yeah. Again, hello everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about this knowledge exchange partnership that DeiC is part of. It is a collaboration that started back in, I think it is 2003, and it informs DeiC policies on open access and also is a kind of a collaboration where you could exchange knowledge of different kind of things within the infrastructure area. So yeah, you can move on, Anna. Next slide. Yeah. So the knowledge exchange partners is, as you can see, 6 national e-infrastructure corporations in Europe. So DFG in Germany, DeiC in UK, DeiC in Denmark, SURF Netherlands, CSC in Finland, and CNIS in France. This has been almost the same from the start. I think CSC was a newcomer like 5 years ago or so. As I say, it's kind of a collaboration between infrastructure organizations, and the aim is really to help partners improve their performance, to support the research landscape in their countries, and of course, most of all, the universities. And there's no dependence of EC or external funding. It's a small and agile collaboration, and we used to say it's really informed and driven by experts. The outputs that we produce is mainly explorative work, but also landscape studies and recommendations. Yeah, next slide. in 2023, this year, so we have had like 4 main activities. We have been producing a big report on the persistent identifiers. We also work on fair data software connected to reproducibility. And within the open access area, we have a project on small publishers and their transition to open access, their hurdles and also possibilities to help these kind of publishers. And as the last one, we have been focusing on alternative publishing platforms, and a report was published earlier this year. Yeah, so I will talk you a little bit through and give you an overview of these activities. So for the persistent identifiers, we wanted really to look into possible strategic and operational path to a well-functional PID infrastructure, but also to look at the risks associated with it. Here you can see there's a link to the report, so just the next slide. So we also so KE produced this main report. It came out in May, but we also produced 7 case studies, so you can really dig into success stories, but also failures, because you can often learn from that as well. And there's also a case study directed for specifically funders that I think would be of use. Certainly in Denmark and but also beyond. Yeah, go ahead. So here's some selective findings from this report. So you could consider PID as being very a technical thing, a persistent identifier for digital objects, being documents or organizations or people, like we know from ORCIDs and DOIs and so on. But this report was talking to a lot of stakeholders, and we could conclude that it's really also both a social and technical infrastructure, and trust in organizations are really perhaps even more important than the technological side. Yeah. We saw that the most well-established PID was, as you know, the DOI, ORCIDs, and RAW, but there's also a lot of new emerging PIDs coming up, like the funder grant IDs, and standards like UN and schemes like ARC. And when the interview has been running, interoperability, value-added services, availability, and connectivity was one of the main highlights from the interview persons. Yeah. And in this landscape of PIDs, there's kind of 2 groups of PIDs. There's more the technical ones, like it could be kind of an infrastructure or machines, bottom-up researcher driven, but also admin-oriented PIDs from funder sides, for example, the grant IDs and so on. And open source and open data was really key features mentioned for trust and reliability. And establishing a community of PID, or really coordinating this whole area is so important, and is a bit of lacking now. And also it needs to be a really strategic plan for rolling out PIDs also at a national level, so making a roadmap and look into what is the best solution. Yeah, so again, it's a bit fragmented landscape right now, competing initiatives, and I know that EASC now also in the fair impact project is looking into some kind of coordination. So they are following up on this study. And here you can see the framework that was used to consider the trustworthiness of the PIT services. So both services, technology, and organization, of course, plays a role alongside with this more human factors. The other activity I'm going to mention is the alternative publishing platforms. And alternative here means really alternatives to the more legacy publishers. It's also meaning innovative in forms of peer review or forms of outputs, like it's not just the journal article, but also preprints and data and so forth. And we published a report earlier this year, and we made a kind of interactive visualization tool where you can look at the characteristics of these platforms. We made an open call, so you can change already now, Hannah. Yeah, we made an open call to identify these alternative publishing platforms. So the content here we are working in is really a moving and complex landscape of publishing platforms out there. But we thought there was really a need to get an overview and also identify main characteristics. And based on that, you can also better evaluate these platforms. Yeah. So just to see what was the steps here, we made a scoping paper and also a call for entries. And as I said, it ended up with 45 platforms responding to this call for entries. Yeah, next one. Most of the platforms were really institution-based and in that sense run by kind of academic-led. Next one. Just take the other. Yeah. So all the findings. Thank you. It was only a group of fewer than 10, I would say, that really came out as truly alternative ways of doing things. So in terms of non-traditional publication types, post-publication peer review, and open reviews. But yeah, we have a plan to follow up on this study and explore more what it takes to be for a platform, for example, to be more innovative. So yeah, there will be a continuation of this study. Yeah, next one. So the last one I'm going to talk about is our most recent study, minimum conditions supporting reproducible research. The main question is what supports scaling up reproducibility practices at universities, at research performing organizations. We do that, as we often do, with a kind of an expert group with dedicated experts from the key countries, but also here we have involved two consultants, and you can follow the project at our website. And we focused on this area, the university level, researcher level, decision maker level, because we found that there was too much top-down information, and we needed to focus on what can enable institutions to scale up these practices. So we focus really at the institutional level, but also both on the managers and researchers, and I hope to get them to the table together and find solutions together. And the study elements is here. We are almost there. We have been doing a lot of, or the consultants has been doing a literature review. There's been a lot of interviews and focus groups. And perhaps also want to mention we have included meetings with some of these new national reproducible networks. Also in Denmark, we just got a new network in August. So we have tried and had feedback from the community as well. The final report will be available early next year. And then we just finally the references, so you can read, of course, more about all these findings. And please get in touch if you want to hear more about this KE or some of the activities, and continue the conversation at our website or get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mette, for a wonderful presentation. I must say I was very struck by the phrasing where you define PIDs as a socio-technical infrastructure. That's a different way of thinking of PIDs than we usually do. And I also noted that in the slide where you presented key findings, you mentioned trust and trustworthiness a whole lot. Can you say something more about the value of trust that you found in your interviews?
Yeah, it's really a good point, and that's of course connects to the social thing. What constitutes the trust? I think some of the things was that it was really this open governance, open and transparency in governance was one of the key points. Also openness on the whole operation side and transparency as well. And also trust that this was a sustainable operation or altogether, that they had some good funding based on it, because some of the risk cases we also met was that really suddenly pit the pit infrastructure could fail because, well, then there wasn't any more funding available. So that was some of the main things.
Thank you very much. We have a question in the chat. Andre, would you like to pose your question yourself?
Yeah, sure. I was noticing that you mentioned the RAID ID for research projects, and I wanted to know if there was some work being done towards implementing this on a national level in Denmark.
I'm not aware of that right now, but that's also what Knowledge Exchange can do. It can act as a kind of think tank, and the strong recommendation here is to make a kind of national roadmap in Denmark, and certainly that would be one of the takeoffs here to implement in Denmark. That would be really an important step.
Thank you.
And now I'm very happy to be able to introduce Mareike to you. She has the tube system has released her from its gaps. So we have Mareike with us, and I will give her the word next.
Thank you, and apologies everybody for me being late. Well, there you can see the role that infrastructure plays in principle for everything, and not only for research, but this is actually also one of the points that I want to make. I didn't want to demonstrate it in practice though, so really I'm really very sorry. So there was this one metro line that there is a failure on the trains, and then I had to find my way around in a different way. But anyhow,
now you're here, and let me introduce you to begin with. The other speakers introduced themselves at the beginning of the webinar, but I can give you a brief introduction and just say that Mareike is Senior Advisor in Research Data Management at the Copenhagen Business School, and she is also a member of the DeiC Data Management Advisory Forum. We've heard about DeiC already, and here we have one of the Advisory Forum members. And with that, now please go ahead, Mareike.
Thank you very much, Karen. Before I begin, I would like to give a little proviso on what I'm what I will be able to present, because as Karen just said, I'm placed at the university, so I'm not centrally placed, for instance, at our ministry, and therefore how I present the open science landscape in Denmark is very much informed, of course, by my perspective. But I think it's a very legitimate perspective, because I would be one of the people implementing or helping to implement national strategies locally. And so if there aren't any, or I'm not aware of any, this makes this local work of implementation difficult. And this is already kind of one of my key takeaways. But let's have a look at the agenda of my talk. I will start out very briefly. I don't want to bore you, but very briefly. So what is open science? Because I also have one point to make about that towards the very end, and we will look at different models together, and then I will walk you through the open science landscape by reusing Brian Nosek's pyramid of these elements of cultural change, where the basis of everything is the infrastructure, and the infrastructure is what Sofie and Mette have talked about, and that's of course closely related to user face and experience, and I will have a look at the other three elements: policy, incentives, and communities. And then I have one last slide. So where do we go from here? Very briefly, open science. I think the most comprehensive definition of open science that is also by now most widely used is the UNESCO recommendation on open science that was signed in 2021. Here we have an extremely broad view of what open science is. We have these four major topics. We have the green area of scientific knowledge production, which is kind of the more traditional sphere of what universities have done for a long time. Then we have open science infrastructures in violet, and that's what, for instance, in Denmark is taken care of by DeiC. And then we have two more, namely one, open engagement of or with societal actors. And this, I think, one could broadly label under the heading of citizen science. And then we have something that is kind of opening up towards stakeholders that maybe have not been so much taken into consideration by the traditional academic system, namely, so what's our impact on local communities? How do we relate to indigenous peoples? If our country has relations to indigenous peoples, and how are we dealing with marginalized scholars? So this is this very broad UNESCO view of what open science is, and what we can see, and what I think is quite important, is that the scope of academic activities is very much broadened to address societal issues and societal actors that haven't been involved in the academic enterprise earlier. This one I like very much, and many of you may know it's Eva Mendes. She created this so-called open science mushroom, where instead of an umbrella, we have this mushroom with the roots or a rhizome going all the way into the earth. And there we have integrity, research infrastructure, a rewarding system. And then all of these practices that are kind of under this mushroom, and citizen science would be kind of the unifying heading, and the stem of the mushroom are standards and governance. And then last but not least, this is Liber's take on open science, or open science skills that should be developed at the academic institutions, let's put it. And what I think is quite interesting, and Liber is the League of European Research Libraries, and I will hop quickly back. So if we think here, we have scientific knowledge production, infrastructures, and then this engagement of societal actors. Yes, we have this here in Liber as well, but it's only 1 out of 5 elements, and these other elements, fair data, metrics, scholarly publishing, research integrity, which traditionally have been topics that the research libraries have addressed, they're much more prominent. So the focus on societal actors is a bit less in this view. But what we can see, and this is true of all these 3 visualizations, is that open science is obviously much more than publishing or research data. And this we should keep in mind, because this should then also be an ambition of a national strategy to address maybe not all 4 of these elements that are prominent in the UNESCO recommendations, but at least take this serious and open the strategic ambitions of the academic institutions up. Yeah. So now let's have a look concretely at the landscape in terms of policies. And there we can say, or maybe to start with, but I gave that away already in my introduction. So we do not have a national open science strategy. We do not have any national policy on, and if you go onto the ministry's website and you search for open science, you do not get any hit. So this tells you something about the level of ambition that politics place on open science. So in principle, as an overall topic or an overall concept, it doesn't play a role in Denmark. And I find this surprising, let's put it like that, because we can see that, for instance, Norway is quite ambitious, and Sweden has, especially during their presidency at the EU, really put a lot of focus on open science. And we normally always look from Denmark to our Nordic neighbors and always want to be on par with the initiatives that are going on. But here we can see Denmark is really lagging behind, and also behind Finland, not least. But so, okay, no national open science strategy, but we shouldn't give up all hope, because there are other policies covering aspects of the open science field. For instance, we've had a national open access strategy since 2014. We've already have the second one, and the second one is monitored through the so-called Danish Open Access Indicator that has quite ambitious goals that haven't been met since the indicator exists. But so if you look at the last measurement from April 2023, we can see that 69% of all research articles were published open access. But this is, of course, a very broad concept because it covers all routes to open access, the green, the golden, and the so-called diamond as well. And yeah, so below the goal for 2023 of 82% open access publications, but we are close. And what's positive is that we can see an ambition at the institutions to really meet these goals. But then an institution like Copenhagen Business School only publishing in social science journals where we have these traditional 6 to 12 months embargo on publications that cannot be made open access before ending of the embargo period. For us, it's difficult to meet this goal. And the same is true for all the other universities. We have one university, the IT university, that has been overachieving in relation to the goals of the National Open Access Strategy since its start. But everybody else is struggling to one degree or another. Then we have had several infrastructure roadmaps and strategies, and this the roadmap for research infrastructure has been kind of a tool in the toolkit of the ministry and the agency for higher education and research since 2011, and these policies have driven a lot of development in Denmark. So for instance, that DeiC was founded as a national cooperation between all 8 universities. That was one result of the earliest roadmap for research infrastructure, and that we now can boast of having a national fair strategy is a result of the strategy for national collaboration on digital research infrastructure from 2019. And so these policies have had a significant effect. And if you think back to the pyramid by Brian Nosek, as I was saying, infrastructure is really the basis for everything else. And of course, you cannot build the infrastructure and then believe that people will come. But if you build the infrastructure and other things on top, for instance, communities, that you provide support for how do we use that, but also at the same time these policy incentives, then things will work together. And we have seen the beneficial effect of policies on the in the infrastructure sphere. Now, our national, this is, I would say, the current crown jewel within our open science activities that everybody is quite proud of. So we have this national strategy for data management based on the FAIR principles. And it wasn't just kind of a symbolic marker of now we want to make things fair, but there was also a I will hop one further. There was also this effort of coordinating the implementation process of the national strategy locally, and therefore the agency appointed an advisory group that should kind of follow the local implementation at the universities, and they appointed working groups that then were looking at specific topics, for instance, policy infrastructure, costing, budgeting, competence development, information security, and GDPR during the first mandate period. And now for the second mandate period that just started, there is a sixth group that will look at the assessment of data's value, because we believe that it's important to start the discussion. So what is valuable data that should be kept for the long term, and what data should we delete after a period that we also have to agree upon, but it could be probably 10 years or maybe 15 years. We will see what the working group comes up with. And the idea is that neither the advisory group nor the working group kind of drive the implementation process, but follow. And so we have this approach of nudging the institutions to do something because they know that somebody is watching them. So the institutions, the hope would be that the institutions would make serious efforts in all the areas where working groups have been appointed, so that things start to happen. So that's the national fair strategy. Now, what about the local landscape? We can say that all universities have local open access policies and have had them for a long time. We have well-established workflows. We have these reporting flows that go into the open access, the National Open Access Indicator. And this is just something that is working very well for research articles. At least I think now there are also discussions about, okay, can we make monographs and books also open access? Also, all universities have local policies for research data management. To one degree or another. So there are some that are quite elaborate, and we will hear look more closely at the example of Copenhagen University. Others are a bit more general and broad, but they will probably now revise their policies in light of the national fair strategy. And then we have one university that has a local open science policy. And that's the University of Southern Denmark. And I think this is really something that is exceptional, and it's fantastic that they made this effort. But then if you read the policy, or I at least was a bit disappointed, because in principle it just covers OA and research data management. So it doesn't have the same ambition that, for instance, the UNESCO recommendation have. Yes, so this was policy landscape. Now, what about incentives? We have, of course, a merit and incentive structure at all universities, but I would say that the incentives for researchers are still mostly based on publications. So we are still very much behind all the discussions that have taken place within the broader and international open science community. But then in 2022, so last year, the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, COARA, was formed. And this coalition tries to push this systemic reform of the academic incentive and reward system forward. And I think this is the right way to do it, because this would then lead or then researchers wouldn't feel that suddenly they are locally pushed to do something that's maybe not rewarded in the same way in another institution that they might switch to at a later point in their career. So COARA wants to reform research assessment from an international perspective. And we have a lot of national signatories. So interestingly, it's some funders, and it's also some universities, but not all. So 6 out of 8, and I'm very, very angry that my own home university isn't one of the signatories. Yeah, this shows you again the ambition of the different universities in relation to doing something about the reward and assessment system. And another point, we don't have a national Danish chapter. There is a Norwegian one, and I'm not sure about the Swedish. Yeah, but maybe you can enlighten us in the discussion. So that's regarding incentives. And then communities. There are the two communities with the most professional logos are the ones that are most immature, let me put it like that. But we have these three communities. We have the Danish Research Data Management Network that was created bottom up after the so-called Data Management Forum didn't receive any funding any longer after 2019. So this is upheld by the local research data management support staff at all universities, but we also invited staff from the university colleges in, and we are doing it's mostly a knowledge sharing initiative. We have monthly lunch meetings. We have biannual seminars where we meet and discuss specific topics for an entire day. It works very well, but it is not funded. So it's an initiative that only works because there are people that we call in Denmark ildsjæle, so these fiery souls that are driving stuff because they are enthusiastic about a topic. And the same is true in relation to the reproducibility network or the open science community. So these are still in the making. The Danish Reproducibility Network was officially launched in August this year. It's a researcher-driven network with loads of interesting and enthusiastic researchers who want to share knowledge about reproducibility and related topics. And the open science community has a bit broader view and taps into the international network of open science communities that was started in the Netherlands, but where we also have at least one, if not several, in Sweden. Yes. So then we have local research data management support at all of the 8 universities, and not to forget the Royal Library, and of course DeiC also supports to some degree. Everything related to the national infrastructure is supported and helped by DeiC. And I have to say that all the DeiC data management staff, they are of course also members of these communities. So we are in a very close dialogue regarding competence building between infrastructure owners, the libraries, and the universities, but without funding. So it's something that is growing bottom up. There was a period with funding from 2016 to 19, and this kind of lay the foundation, but there is no funding any longer, and this is an issue that we are constantly discussing. Yeah, and then users experience and infrastructures, that would have been my pointer to Anne-Sophie's presentation that you've already heard. So where do we go from here? So how does it look? I would say we are best placed in relation to communities, and we have efforts on all other levels. And I've been a bit nasty by not putting a green infrastructure check mark, because we are still waiting for the national data repository. It's still waiting for the national storage facility, but I mean, it's on their way. And the same is true in relation to the incentives discussion and policy. So there is something, but the picture is not perfect. And maybe I was a bit too soft on the communities, because in principle we have one that is working very well. That's the Danish RDM network, and the others are kind of in the making. But yeah, I think we are well on our way. And where do we go from here? So one thing is, I believe we need a national discussion that open science is more than open access and RDM. And the other thorny issue is who should or would want to own open science? Where should this be pushed forward? At the ministry level? Could this be something? I know that that DeiC is open, but they have mostly an infrastructure mandate, or should it be the universities? But then we would look at a fragmentation of all these issues in the entire landscape, I believe. Yeah, so that's the overall status quo and perspectives. So thank you.
Thank you very much for a great presentation, Mareike. I have several questions, but I can save them to after the next presentation, after Susanne's. But I would like to pick up on the point where you said, Mareike, that there's no open science policy at the national political level in Denmark. And I presume that this is what is one of the reasons to the variation that you described at the different universities. There are several infrastructures and there are policies causing great changes, but the question is, what drives these policies, or how do you anchor them at the university level to make everything actually happen? So now let's give the word to Susanne, who will actually tell us what happens at the university level at the University of Copenhagen. Please, Susanne.
So yeah, my name is Susanne Boer and I work at the University of Copenhagen. I work centrally at the University of Copenhagen. So today this talk will really be a case showing you how we have worked with implementing the university policy and for data management and what our policy looks like. But I always personally like to start with a bit of an overview of what does the university look like. So we are the largest university in Denmark. We have close to 37,000 students and 5,500 researchers spread out over 6 different faculties, where the Faculty of Science and the Faculty of Health and Medical Science are by far the largest. I work in the central administration, and central administration is depicted by these gray boxes, where I sit in the Department for Research and Information Security, where we carry out research support tasks. So the data management assignment is placed in that unit, and of course we collaborate with our university's IT department to deliver infrastructure services. We are in a little bit of a special setup in Denmark. I think a couple of our universities, not all, a couple of our universities have this setup where our university library is actually not part of the university, but belongs to the Danish Royal Library. That means that they are not the hub for coordinating data management activities. They cannot do that on behalf of the university because they're actually rather more a service provider than they are an integrated part. This is sometimes a little bit of a handicap, I would say, but this is why coordination for data management lies with us in the research admin department. But of course, we collaborate between these green boxes. We collaborate a lot, and we divide other tasks between us. Yes, so how is it all set up at University of Copenhagen? As Mareike also mentioned, we do not have an overarching open science policy at the University of Copenhagen. Our data management policy is rather anchored in our initiatives for responsible conduct of research. So we have now recently gotten a renewed version of our own local code of conduct for responsible research. A new version came out This is, of course, very much aligned to the Danish Code of Conduct, which is also very much aligned to the European Code of Conduct, the ALIA Code. And a lot of our policies are kind of anchored into that framework. So we have more specific codes and guides that are hooked into this Code of Conduct. So we have a code for authorship. We have a guide on conflicts of interest. We have a code of ethics for research communication, communication with the media, how to do that in the right way. And that is, of course, that's actually a Danish initiative that we adhere to. And then we have a data management policy, the second version. The first one came out in 2014, and we have a renewed one. And then, of course, we have other research-related policies that are not so much anchored into our code of conduct, but are, for example, the information security policy. Yeah, well, as I mentioned today, I will have a very narrow focus. I will only talk about research data management because that's my expertise, and we do not have an open science policy. I think that is a very sad thing, but what we also can notice, and that's just a hard truth, I can notice that, and I think maybe some of you perhaps can relate, is that in a past couple of years, the information security agenda has received the biggest focus from our leadership, and somehow this has, I think, pushed the open science agenda a little bit to the side. Unfortunately, it's very hard to make our research leaders aware that this actually can coexist. But right now, there's lots of focus on information security, and I think open science has suffered a little bit as a consequence, unfortunately. But yeah, data management policy, we have that. And what is driving this field? You'll probably recognize it. Of course, the university is interested in transparent research, reproducible research. We don't want to have data loss. We want to avoid breaches of confidentiality, all of these things. So, of course, it's in everyone's interest to kind of have activities in this area. But what is mainly driving this field are the stakeholder requirements. I think you will all recognize this. And they have dramatically increased over the last, I think, 6-7 years, right? Since our previous policy in 2014, lots of new stuff has happened. And these first three things, I think, apply to all of us. It's the funders that are pushing this agenda, most notably Horizon Europe. We get lots of Horizon funding at our university, so we actually must help our researchers write data management plans and provide open access to data. Have them do that. Similarly, and I have to say the Danish funders are still a bit lagging behind in that respect. There are very few funders that actually have policies that say anything about data management. So I think this will come. They are part of our national network in discussing the FAIR principles. So they are considering this now, but right now it's still the European Commission that is kind of pushing this. Similarly, publishers, you all know that we have legislation. You also know that GDPR, and then this directive on open data and the reuse of public sector information, mandating all universities in Europe to make data open by default. This was a really basis under our FAIR strategy, and that is also something that we then have to adopt at the university. As Mareike also mentioned, we don't just have a code, we have this national strategy for data management. We have to relate to that. And then there are other stakeholders. I just want to mention here our Danish National Archives 3 years ago. They came with a new executive order mandating researchers at universities to register metadata for most of their research projects, actually, so that the Danish National Archives can assess whether these the associated data sets need to be transferred to the National Archives to be archived indefinitely, right? And just one of these, just an executive order like this has tremendous effects on the universities. Well, it's going to cost us tremendous amount of resources, for example, to just implement it, just to make researchers aware that they now actually have to register their project with the National Archive and do all this data transfer and reformat that data in a way so that it can actually be archived. So this is a process that we're also in the middle of trying to figure out how are we going to implement this. And of course, we are at the national level debating how to do this in the best way. And then the last stakeholder that I want to mention that was very important for us, we also have a Danish state auditor. They basically come around and do all sorts of checks, right? So a couple of years ago, all Danish universities were reviewed and they were checked to see how well are we actually protecting our research data. And it was quite a critical report overall in Denmark. Maybe we're not doing so well, and we got lucky that we were named specifically in this report, because at the University of Copenhagen, it was very unclear who actually holds the responsibility for making sure that research data is protected. And it was in particular that report that made our rector decide, okay, enough is enough. We need to actually set some minimum requirements for this area. We need to update our data management policy. So that's actually what kicked it off. But in the end, all of this somehow, we need to raise awareness for all of this somehow. So a policy is the place where we kind of collect this all in one place. Yes. So since last year, we have a new data management policy. It is quite large. We had one page before in 2014. It didn't say a lot. It said research is just responsible for everything. That's no longer the case. We have 40, I think 10 pages or something with the different principles, and it is structured around the data life cycle. So it takes the order of elements in the life cycle. So, for example, we have made data management plans mandatory at the University of Copenhagen. The idea, I think that's where the biggest weight lies in the policies, that we really want researchers to consider better how they should handle that data. We really want them to go through this thought process. Okay, who do I need to agree with? What rights are there in my data? Where am I going to store it? What's my backup strategy? What's my long-term preservation plan? They should do that at the start. It's going to help prevent a whole lot of issues for them in the end. So DMPs are a big focus for us. And as I already mentioned, a really big focus also is alignment of expectations. And I will come to that a little bit more detail later. We of course say that the researchers should describe their research in the data set through metadata that facilitates searching, identification, and interpretation of data. That's of course part of the FAIR agenda. We write that they have to collect and process data in line with best practice in the discipline. This is of course a very generic statement, but because it's an overarching university policy, we cannot really get very specific on things that are very discipline specific. We basically also tell our researchers, or the policy instructs our researchers, that they have to choose infrastructure in accordance with the data classification and the project's risk assessment. So many researchers ask us, tell us the one storage solution where we must store our data. And yes, we could basically tell them, use this, right? But we want to get away from the system. We want to have researchers understand when they need to use which solution, because we of course have multiple storage solutions. So we want to kind of have this culture change where researchers are able to distinguish or identify what type of data they have. So do a data classification. So they need to, for example, be able to identify when they work with personal data. They need to be able to identify that these type of data need extra protection, and then need to be able to identify that this system is therefore best tailored to store this type of data. So that's kind of it all sounds very logical, right? But it's not necessarily common practice right now. So we want to change that, of course, according to this EU executive order and our national FAIR strategy. We also, by default, ask researchers to make data open, of course, as open as possible, as protected as necessary. And when sharing data, of course, researchers should adhere to the FAIR principles. And we have basically defined a couple of minimum principles. So instead, FAIR is of course a gradient, right? There are many different steps in making data fair. So we basically formulated some minimum requirements for FAIR. Then researchers also have to have some sort of offboarding procedures in place, right? They shouldn't just move on to a next project. They need to think about what's happening to the data after the project. And as our Danish Code of Conduct says, those data that underlie publication need to be around for at least 5 years after publication, so that researchers have the ability to defend themselves when questions regarding their publications arise, for example, right? That's the main reason. So that's kind of in a nutshell what it says in our policy. Of course, we have a lot more elaborated, but the biggest difference for us also was with this policy is that we have added a third chapter, and that's about roles and responsibilities. And you may remember that I just said that this Danish state auditor basically told us that we really sucked at communicating who has actually did what. So this third chapter was a direct consequence of that. So we have defined a number of roles at the university and assigned responsibilities to each of these roles. And the more senior you get, the more responsibilities are tacked on. So as a starting point, students and research support staff, they must adhere to the policy when carrying out or contributing to research projects at the University of Copenhagen. And the big change for us was also that we have incorporated students, bachelor and master students. Before they were not in, but now bachelor and master students, when they work on their own research question during a bachelor or master thesis project, we consider them to be working with research data, and therefore they also have to adhere to our policy, which means that we'll have to start to come with initiatives targeting students as well. And then, as I said, the more senior you get, the more responsibilities you get. So researchers on top of this also need to make sure that they that the expectations in projects are aligned, for example, on rights to data, who can do what, who will have access to data during and after the project. And we encourage them to, of course, as much as possible, include cost to data management and funding applications. And we can see that, of course, multiple funders start to make funding available for this. So, yeah. Supervisors, if you take on the role as a supervisor at our university, I mean, it sounds very logical, but it wasn't written down anywhere. If you take on the role of a supervisor, you're actually in charge of making sure that your student or the researcher that you supervise understands how they should manage their data. So you need to train them or mentor them or send them to courses. You must make sure that these students actually understand that any legislation or requirements applicable to their projects. It's your responsibility, and you actually have to follow this process along. Similarly, research leaders, so that could be PIs in research projects, but also group leaders, they must make sure that people in their research groups or in their research projects are equipped in the same way. They need to understand what legislation applies, what that means, and how they manage their data accordingly. And on top of that, and that's also an important point, it's them that are responsible for identifying when an alignment of expectations actually needs to be captured in an official contract. So it's that layer of the organization. Our deans, so the heads of our faculties, they are responsible for making sure that this policy actually gets implemented in the research environment. They also have to increase awareness for data management and assign discipline-specific support relevant for their research field. Whereas the rector, of course, the head of our university, needs to make sure that non-discipline specific, so overarching support is made available, such as, for example, storage infrastructure, but also more the generic training courses that we offer. And of course, there needs to be some money available for all of this. Yes, so let's see. So I just want to mention an example before I kind of wrap it up on how a policy can help situations at the university. We have, for example, really very much thought about rights to data. We had some legal professors help us with this case. And what they have basically told us, and according to the Danish legislative setup, you have some different phases in a research project. So you'll start with physical objects. From those, you may obtain some digital data. You don't always start with physical objects, but you may. From those, you obtain digital data, and a special category of these digital data are data with commercial potential. And from these data, you obtain publications. So what our legal professors told us is that physical objects fall under property law. So here the university holds the rights. This means that researchers cannot remove physical material without permission from a research leader. Similarly, any data with commercial potential, here the university holds the rights. However, publications, of course, here researchers themselves hold the copyright, which they, of course, then often sign over to publishers. But now this box of digital data, which can mean all sorts of different things. And that's really a problematic case. There's different types of data covered by different laws, and all these laws have also different legal effects. So here we have actually decided at our university that we actually cannot come with a one-size-fits-all rule on ownership. And that's maybe very different from other universities. So we do not say that university owns all. Instead, and that's also in the policy, we we require our researchers to align on expectations. So if they have anything in these red categories, it's rather straightforward. If there's anything in this gray category, they need to talk to each other about it, and we provide them a checklist of things to think about. So we don't want to have this one-size-fits-all rule on ownership, because apparently this is legally very unclear, or so the law professor told me. There's too many exceptions to this rule, and there are too many assumptions by researchers on what this actually means, and which will prevent them from actually talking to their colleagues about this. So we rather want to encourage them to assess rights and come to an agreement, rather than to have this rule that's unclear and all sorts of assumptions float around. And why this can be helpful, I just want to mention a case that happened at our university. Our Research Integrity Committee got this case. This is a case where a PhD student at our university was going to collect information about the prevalence of parasites in pigs. And he or she, I don't know, they were basically working on an industrial PhD project. So they were working in collaboration with a commercial partner, or not at all. In this case, it was an interest organization, the Danish Agriculture and Food Council. This PhD student was supposed to collect their own data, but something happened halfway in this project. And the Danish Agriculture and Food Council said, you know what, we have already collected these data and we have already run some analysis. You just take our data instead, because it's anyway the same. I mean, I would already start to feel like a conflict of interest situation here, of course, when a Danish Agriculture Council says they have the data on the parasite prevalence in pigs. But anyway, they went along with the data from this council, and what then in the end happened was that this council said, but this is our data, so you cannot get access. So this PhD student, actually her PhD thesis or his, couldn't be verified by the PhD committee because there was no access to the data, and also of course there was no transparency of the associated research papers. No one could check up whether these conclusions actually were right. So two senior researchers in this PhD students group accused the student of engaging in scientific, bad practice, what is it called? Questionable research practice, and this case ended up in a research committee. And this all happened before our new policy was in place. But having our new policy now, what we would say in these cases, right, what didn't happen here is there was no alignment of expectations. There was, people did not sit together to assess, okay, will we actually have access to these data at project end? Our new policy says, of course, you have to. Our new policy also says data need to be accessible to researchers for 5 years after publication. That didn't happen here. And also, instead of throwing this poor PhD student under the bus, our new policy also said actually the research leaders that should have made an agreement on this at project start. And this for me is just an example to show that I think that this policy will actually help if we implement this to raise more awareness. We may actually prevent these type of cases. And of course, I also think that the university here should consider whether they want to engage in these type of projects anyway in the future, if they already know that the data will not be made available. Perhaps we shouldn't even start these collaborations in the first place. So what are we doing now? We are implementing this all. The faculties, as I said, they are the ones responsible for actually putting this policy in practice. We from central administration cannot steer this. This needs to be a research-driven task. So they're responsible for developing a plan and a timeline for implementation, and most of them have done that now. And they, of course, need to then establish discipline-specific support and communication and tools. We in the central administration coordinate this. We, of course, are not interested in 6 faculties going in 6 directions. So we are trying to identify like common issues that we can help collaboration on. And we also evaluate policy implementation every 2nd year. And we have done it already now in the summer. All faculties were asked to send back an evaluation form where we ask them about how far they are in implementing. And I think this is kind of maybe the depressing view. We ask them how mature they are in each of the elements. We can see that, and this is basically covering all the policy principles. So data management plans, clarifying rights, adhering to GDPR, documenting so that project can be repeated, storing data according to data classification, share data openly and fair, and preserve data after project end. The current truth is that across our universities, I think most of these processes are still ad hoc. That's just how it is. Luckily for when it comes to GDPR compliance, we have procedures established. And we just, of course, hope that in the coming years, these bars are going to move a little bit more to the right when this implementation really kicks off. This kind of collecting this type of feedback is also going to help us engage on the national level, because we now have information that we can contribute, for example, in a national fair working group. So I think following this is really a must-have. We, of course, also help with central non-discipline specific initiatives, and we, along the way, also hope to coordinate the building of a support structure. And I don't know if you recognize this at all. This here on the left is, of course, what we want, this kind of nice umbrella structure with contact people at the different layers, like admin, the central admin has a contact at the faculty, who has a contact at the department. But the reality is kind of this, right? Because there's some individual research groups, they don't want to wait for all of this. They go ahead and they build their own infrastructure and their own tools, and poof, and they have contact with the random person. So, I mean, the reality is it's a little messy right now, but I hope that that along the way we can kind of get a little bit more structure in this. Yeah. So what do we have? And I will wrap up now. The national ones I will not talk about. You already heard it. We are going to use lots of the national resources, but of course we have many templates and guidelines around for data management plans. We run lots of workshops for Horizon and in our university template. Also have workshops on information security, online courses for students on GDPR and data management. We have lots of mandatory face-to-face courses on data management. We have our own electronic research data archive, where you can also publish data with the DOI, which will be the basis actually for the new DeiC storage. And we have a central information portal for all of this. And this is, again, all at central level. I want to wrap up by saying what I've learned in this process. I want to tell you that, I think we should never expect that researchers are actually going to read our policy. We know that they don't. That's just how it is. But we actually feel that policies are very important because it anchors our initiatives in the organization. It actually made a requirement on leadership to establish initiatives so that we can help researchers digest this policy and have activities in place so that they can adhere to these principles. Changes are going to happen overnight. It's going to take years to implement, and the endpoint will always shift because new rules will come in, and it will be very different between disciplines. We need to keep raising awareness for this and evaluating how they're doing. But to end on a positive note, we do really notice a big culture change already. Researchers in the beginning were very critical. Now they actually come to us because they have figured out that this is actually something that will benefit them. And we can see that multiple research groups have started to hire people and started their own initiatives. So that's what I wanted to say. And 1 minute, so we're a bit late, but you are always welcome to contact me if you want to learn more about the University of Copenhagen.
Thank you very much, Susanne, for a very informative and very dense presentation. Thank you.
Sorry.
I think we will bring in one last question, actually, in connection with Susanne's presentation. Andre, would you like to pose your question yourself?
Sure. Quickly, you mentioned that the DMP is mandatory in your RDM policy. Is the preservation plan also mandatory, and is it a separate document or a part of the DMP?
Well, that's what for faculties to decide, basically. So we basically can make a framework, but it's up to them to decide how they will do it. We have made a generic data management plan template available where we have basically asked questions where there's questions in there on data preservation that could kind of form a data preservation plan for them. So if faculties decide to use that generic template, they will have the preservation plan kind of built into the thinking of the data management plan. But we can see that, for example, at one of our faculties, they have on top of that also have hired people who are supposed to do onboarding and offboarding conversations with each project. So there's on top of that also other procedures in place to have conversations also about where do we move your data. So it's going to be solved in slightly different ways at the different faculties. But the data management plan can be used for that. It's just not up for us to determine that from central team. Hope that answers your question.
Perfectly, thank you.
And may I add an additional question there, Susanne? Since you state that the DMP is mandatory, is there a consequence for researchers or projects who do not maintain one?
Well, again, that is not something we can decide centrally. I also very much hope that we do not go into a system where we centrally are registering these DMPs. My belief is that they need to be kept locally along with the research data, and there needs to be procedures in place to make sure that they are stored locally. But no, again, this is up to the faculties to determine. We are too early to see how they will go. But I think, I mean, for example, at the Faculty of Humanities, each funded project above £500,000 Danish crowns must have one within the first half year. I do not know what happens when that doesn't happen, but my suspicion is that the department leadership will follow up with the researchers who do not do that. There is a system in place for this now that mandates all, at least to start with, all funded projects above £500,000 have to have one. And they have to register it somewhere locally. Yeah.
Thank you. That was what I was expecting. That kind of answer. That is what we see all over the place. Good intentions and good policies, but then it's all a question about making it attached to the ground level, making researchers and research projects adhere to these questions. Yeah. But with that, thank you very much for your participation, and thanks to all of you who stopped by to listen to the talks. Thank you very much, all of you. Bye bye.